free speech and free thought, that used to be a liberal cause. I mean, that was, free speech, UC Berkeley, 1960s. We're going to stand up and think and say whatever we want. And, the comedians of the 50s and 60s, they're pushing back against the man, the power authority, which was mostly the right and the Christian right and Republicans. And it was, remember at the time, mostly Republicans mostly wanting to censor things like burning the flag or Madonna's videos or whatever, because their argument was, well, this could harm society. People expressing themselves in a certain way can bring down the moral values of our great God-given, whatever country, and therefore we have to combat that. In a way, the left is now doing that, saying, well, certain speech is harmful, and harmfulness is a form of violence, and we have to prevent violence, and therefore censoring speech is okay. That's kind of the thread.
I want to start with first, though, is just the title, actually, of the book, because that really struck me. Giving the devil his due seems actually quite reverse of the way that most of us behave these days. Perhaps not the two of us right this very moment, but yeah. So much of society seems to be based on not giving the devil his due, just finding, oh, someone thinks something differently than me. That must mean that everything they think and the summation of who they are is somehow evil and wrong. So when you came up with the title, did that have a lot to do with just sort of how we seem to behave like right now?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I'm just finding the page where I want to start on this, how this problem started, because free speech and free thought, that used to be a liberal cause. I mean, that was, free speech, UC Berkeley, 1960s. We're going to stand up and think and say whatever we want. And, the comedians of the 50s and 60s, they're pushing back against the man, the power authority, which was mostly the right and the Christian right and Republicans. And it was, remember at the time, mostly Republicans mostly wanting to censor things like burning the flag or Madonna's videos or whatever, because their argument was, well, this could harm society. People expressing themselves in a certain way can bring down the moral values of our great God-given, whatever country, and therefore we have to combat that. In a way, the left is now doing that, saying, well, certain speech is harmful, and harmfulness is a form of violence, and we have to prevent violence, and therefore censoring speech is okay. That's kind of the thread. And it really goes back, I identify on the first page of the book, this goes back to 1919 in the case of Schenck versus the United States. So this is the famous decision by the Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, where the shouting fire in a theater and clear and present danger phrases come from. So here is his decision. The most stringent protection of free speech would not protect a man in falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing a panic. The question in every case is whether the words used are used in such circumstances and are of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger that they will bring about substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. Okay, what was this clear and present danger? This guy Schenck was the head of the Socialist Party in Philadelphia, and he was printing and handing out flyers to draft-age young men who were being drafted. Conscription was legal, and they were being drafted and sent to Europe to die for our country. And Schenck said, wait a minute, that's a violation of the 14th Amendment, which protects your bodily autonomy and right. And no one can take away your life. But in a way, conscription in the draft, that's a way of the government saying, we're taking over your life for a while, and you may die if we order you to go do that. Whoa. Okay, now we can debate that. That's a separate issue. The thing is, how can that be a clear and present danger? That's the equivalent of shouting fire in a crowded theater. Well, now by the 1960s, of course, everybody's protesting the draft and burning their draft cards and running up to Canada or whatever. And that was a liberal cause to say, you know what, that's going too far. It has to be okay to have those kinds of debates and discussions and protests. That's all protected by the Constitution. Here's the U.S. Supreme Court saying, no, we can step in and okay. So fast forward to say, the civil rights movement and the push in the 70s and 80s to improve our speech, right? Okay, so don't use the N-word. That's really harmful. Okay, pretty much everybody go, yeah, that's right. Okay, and by the way, the C word for women and calling Jews kikes and Vietnamese gooks, and the bin starts getting bigger and bigger. Like, yeah, that's hateful. It's so harmful. And therefore it should be censored. So it starts off with good intentions on the part of the left. Like, this is how moral progress starts. But then by the 90s, you get, the bin is getting larger. And then by, a couple of years ago, when I reprinted in there the UC Systems list of microaggressions that are harmful, hateful things to say. Things like, where are you from? Or, wow, you speak English so well. Or, why aren't you good at math? Or, you are good at math.
Right. You have a whole chart laying this out. Yeah.
So,
so you have a whole chart laying these things out. But yeah, so are you surprised, though, the way the mission creep has affected institutions that were supposed to defend these liberal principles? I mean, the easiest one I can give you is Nadine Strossen, who you have the blurb on the back of the book. She was the head of the ACLU. She is a free speech absolutist. She no longer is the head now. She's since retired. But she laid out in this very room the very strong case for why the Nazis should have been allowed to march in Skokie versus Illinois. It was a place where there was a tremendous amount of Holocaust survivors, but the ACLU defended the freedom of speech of a group of odious people because that's what we're supposed to do in this country, where now even the ACLU is often suddenly seemingly on the wrong side of these things. Are you surprised that it's not just affected individual people, but the way that the mission creep has affected the institutions that were supposed to stand up for this stuff?
It has, and I'm worried about that. I don't know if they actually believe it or if they're just scared that they're going to be canceled and censored themselves or whatever. I'm somewhat sympathetic to some university administrators who kind of go along with it because they're scared of losing their jobs, or professors are afraid to say something. But this is the problem. This is the whole reason for tenure in the first place, was to protect liberal professors from these right-wing kooks who wanted to shut them down. Now it's kind of reversed. And so maybe we do need tenure to protect these liberal professors from their fellow leftists or fellow liberals who want to cancel them and shut them down, get them fired. This is a perverse reversal of things that, it's just gone haywire. I mean, so the devil in the title is whoever you disagree with. And whoever disagrees with you or you don't like what they say. I mean, it's easy to grant free speech to people you agree with. That's not who it's for. It's for the people that don't agree with you. Those are the voices we have to hear. Okay, so to articulate the reasons, simply, one person's hate speech is another person's free speech. So I got this from Nadine Strassen's book, that in the 1850s, Southern politicians argued that abolitionists from the North coming into the South to give sermons and speeches and distribute pamphlets about the evils of slavery, that's a form of hate speech. Now, they didn't use that word hate speech, but they basically made the argument that Justice Holmes made, was that this could lead to slave riots and insurrections, and that could lead to the murder of slave owners and the disruption of our peaceful plantation life here in the South. And therefore, we have to censor that. It's like, wow, if they hadn't had this opportunity to champion the abolition of slavery, would we ever have gotten there? And then in the 1960s, there were arguments in the South, again, made against Malcom X in particular, and Martin Luther King slightly less, that what they were saying was they again didn't use the word hate speech, but that this is potentially dangerous to have them coming down here to give these sermons and speeches that rile people up, and they go out in the streets to protest. Wow, we can't have that. Well, wait a minute. That's how social change happens. And that's protected in the Constitution. And again, these are liberal causes that by now it's kind of flipped. So we have to remind ourselves, trying to do in this book, is that, no, here are the reasons. Okay. So I articulate them like Nadine did on your show. It's like, even if you're completely right, you can learn something from somebody else's arguments to improve your own arguments. As John Stuart Mill said, he who knows his own side, only his own side of the case, doesn't even know that, right? So like I have my students watch Ben Shapiro's videos arguing pro-life, and because most of them, they don't know what the pro-life arguments are. And it's like, so even if you end up being pro-choice at the end, you're better off now. But maybe Ben's right about some points, or whatever the other side is. Maybe you're completely wrong and you can learn something new. But mostly the devil part here is for my safety's sake also, that once I set up the norms or laws or customs or whatever to silence you, well, what happens if I'm now in the minority position, or I have the voice that goes against the grain? Then I've already endorsed the apparatus to shut me down. And so that's the best argument, if you want to take it from kind of a selfish perspective, to give the devil his due for your own safety's sake.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about academia instead of nonstop yelling, check out our academia playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, check out our full episode playlist. They're all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.